Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 898. I had the white pieces and started off with knight f3. He went knight f6, so I'm playing a Reti opening, g3. He goes knight c6. That's a very rare move here. You can see it's in the database, but there are no sample games here. So it's, I guess, a known line, but no example games. So d4, which I played, seems to be the best reaction. Maybe you'll push that forward at some point to harass the knight, but you're just claiming the center and taking squares away from those knights. So d5 immediately to stop me from advancing the pawn, and bishop g2, the natural development. And here he plays bishop g4, and we're just out of the opening book. If he had continued bishop f5, I could have played like this. Could have castled. Let's say he goes e6, and I go c4. And this really does start to look like a Catalan. I've got the Catalan set up here. He's just played this move with knight c6, a bit unusual. Instead of keeping the c-pawn flexible, he's blocking it. But this is looks like the Chigorin defense to the queen's gambit, so I suppose it's a possible line. Anyway, he played in this position, he played bishop g4 instead of bishop f5, and we are just out of the opening book. I can't say there's anything really wrong with this, it's just unusual. So I went ahead with c4, just undermining the center as usual. But I thought about this move, knight e5. I didn't realize that it was quite playable here. In fact, it's the best move. I just saw that he could trade it off, but I didn't follow it through. The line given by the chess engine is like this: knight takes, pawn takes. I thought this pawn was kind of awkward, but the knight goes back to d7. You can just snag a pawn, and if it goes back anywhere else, I mean, you have this advanced pawn cramping his position, and where else could it go? Over here, make it trapped, go back. Yeah, it doesn't have many attractive squares to go to, so it seems like that just wins a pawn out of the box there. So bishop g4 is just a mistake, and that's why you don't see it played, and I didn't punish it. I continued with c4. Anyway, he played e6 now, go knight c3. After that pawn is defended, knight to e4 or knight e5 is no longer attractive, because it's the counterplay on the d-pawn that makes that line work. So he continues with bishop b4, so he's got both his bishops out attacking my knights, and he eventually trades them for the knights, which is usually not considered a very good bargain. Well, we'll see how it worked out. I castled. He takes on c3 first. I was castling unpinned my knight, so it was about to spring into life, and then he grabbed a pawn. Maybe he thought he was going to keep this pawn, but it's a weak pawn. He's not going to be able to hold on to it. So I like to get the pawns back immediately, so I brought my queen out and grabbed it. Let's see, and he took the other knight here. So I just think that's funny, giving me the absolute bishop pair. Oh, he played knight d5. Right, yeah, it's a good square for his knight. Maybe he thought he was going to round up this pawn. I could have taken his knight, but I thought I would just grab the pawn. Taking his knight maybe is not good, because he takes back with a pawn and defends it and keeps my queenside pawns locked up. But this is good for white. Let's see, he castles, and I went e4. Oddly enough, e4 is not the best move. I looked at this with the chess engine, and it wants to play with the pieces here. It doesn't want to play the f-pawn forward, and it gives this kind of interesting line. Queen back to d3, say rook to e8, pretty natural move, threatening to push it forward. Bishop just dropping back. We'll see the idea of this in a moment. Knight dropping back, and then f4. So bringing the f-pawn forward and just going for some kind of king side attack. So that's interesting. I kind of like to play with the big center if I can get it. So this is also good. It's just not as strong, apparently, as that queen d3 line. So he drops the knight back now, and I come around this way with my queen. Maybe queen d3 was better. I just wasn't sure about staying in this pin on the d file. He goes knight a5, kicking my queen, and then I go queen to c2. And once again, the computer has kind of a wacky idea. I don't like this one so much, but just to show you how computers can play sometimes. Queen b5. Well, it's hitting his knight. So knight b to c4, defending the knight, so nothing is hanging. Bishop to e2, attacking the knight. c6, attacking the queen. And queen to c5. and then b5 defending the knight. So it's not the kind of position I would want to go for without knowing in advance that it was going to be good for me, because it seems like the queen has some potential to get trapped over here. Of course, he doesn't have any bishop to trap it with, so as long as I can somehow dodge those knights, then I will be okay here. Anyway, that's funny, but not the way I would play. So I went queen c2, pretty normal, and I think this keeps a decent edge for white here. He plays c6, trying to blunt the bishop on this diagonal. Go rook b1, maybe get some pressure on the b pawn at some point, and now he goes knight b to c4, pretty natural spot for that knight. And I bring my bishop off the oh, it was the other bishop. I went bishop e2. Yeah, okay, I'm starting to put pressure on that knight. Also, I'm thinking of lining up on this diagonal. So he went knight back to d6. I went bishop to d3, and he went b5. And now I thought he had to play something like e5 here, but it turns out it's already too late. You know, he's just given me too much of a free hand with these bishops. So he's going to be losing material anyway. Anyway, in the game, he played b5 and I played e5, and that wins a pawn. If he played e5 here to stop that idea, then I can take this pawn. And we get into kind of a complicated line, but it still ends up being better for white. But it was probably black's best chance. It was certainly the top engine choice. So sack that pawn temporarily, get this knight back to c4 where it's a good, and if I want to try and keep my extra material, I trade that off and then grab the b pawn. So I've dragged this knight away from defense of the b pawn, and he gets the e pawn, and so I stay a pawn up, and it's a center pawn, so it's a good advantage for white. But he has gotten rid of one of my bishops, and he's got a good square for his knight for the moment. I guess the problem is going to be that I'm going to push on with f4 and chase that knight away at some point. But anyway, that seems to be the best that black had at that point, and you can see it already loses material. Anyway, he went b5. I pushed on with e5, which is a double attack, hitting the knight and hitting the pawn. So he moved the knight to block, and I just grabbed the material right away. But actually, this is not best. The chess engine, well, first of all, you can notice that the knight is not going to move, or if it does move, you grab the pawn here anyway. So there's no hurry to grab the knight. That's point number one. So say you play rook d1, h6. And now here's the point. He could move the knight away, and there's no longer a pawn hanging here. The chess engine just ignores this possibility and attacks on the queen side here, threatening to win the b pawn. After he defends, there's a trade. And then plays queen e2. So just playing for activity of the pieces, not worrying about grabbing a pawn. This looks like a very strong potential attack on the king side with this knight, the other knight on the wrong side of the board, and both my bishops pointing over here at the king. My queen is going to be coming out to g4. It just looks like a very strong way to play. So this miserable pawn grubbing style that I played in is not best here. And, well, we'll see why. These pawns are all in dark squares, and my remaining bishop is a dark squared bishop. And if he had played a move like queen to d5 here, kind of highlighting the weaknesses on the light squares, I don't have a good minor piece to chase the queen away with. You know, I can develop my dark squared bishop, but it's kind of hemmed in by these pawns. White is still better. White's a pawn up, and white has a little more center control, but you know, black has chances in this position. So that would be the way to play it and the way to take advantage of my pawn grab there. Anyway, he went f6, and I threw in this check first. I didn't want to expose my queen to the attack of the rook. Move the king. Then I decided I didn't want to take that pawn right away, but just develop a piece. If he takes, I'll take back with either the queen or the bishop. I wasn't sure, but seems to be fine for me. So he played g5, kicking my bishop. Had to drop back. And then he went knight c4. So he's getting his knight into the game, but there's a price. He leaves the c pawn hanging. Let's see. Did he have anything better? It's not so good to take here, but that might be best. But this leaves his king all exposed, and I stay a pawn up. So that is also not good for black. Let's see. So he went knight c4. I took on c6. and he pushed on with f5. So this is interesting, maybe trying to harass my harass my bishop a little bit, but he did leave the b pawn hanging. So basically he's just kind of falling apart over here. He trades off the bishop and then plays rook c8 to harass my queen. As long as my queen has a safe square to go to, I'm okay. And I offer the queen trade, so we go into this double rook endgame, which should be pretty easily winning for me. But there was one chance for black to get some interesting counterplay here. So I was a little too incautious, a little too cavalier at a certain point. But, well, so far this is coming along just fine. Let's see, he grabbed the c-pawn. I played rook to e1 after some thought, but I think it's important to defend this pawn at the base of my pawn chain. He went rook c2, getting on the second rank there, and I pushed on with a4. Didn't necessarily want to give up that pawn either and give him an outside passer, but I plan to win with these pawns in the center. So all this is okay. He plays f4. I just take it. He takes back, and then I play rook f1 to pin that pawn, so that was good. He pushes on with f3. I play rook to d7, looking at his pawns and preparing to push mine forward. He went rook g2 check. This is all still okay. There's nothing much he can do here. Let's see, he went with the rook back to d2. And I played d5. So d5 is a bit of a mistake. The simplest way to win is just to keep pushing that e-pawn forward. And there's no real counterplay for black in this position. After d5, though, he does have a chance here. Yeah, so in this position, yeah, instead of e6, I played d5. I could bring this rook over to the b or the c files, threatening to double down here. And that's a little bit awkward. I actually have to search to find the right move. There's only one move here that keeps an advantage for white. That's rook to f7. But there's no way for me to stop him from doubling. Yeah, I thought, well, before he checked my king away, I always had the idea of taking this pawn and then coming back if he was threatening to double. But I don't have that anymore. Taking the pawn and then coming back to the 7th rank there. But that was not possible in this line. So let's see. Yeah, so he gets the double on the 2nd rank. I can grab this pawn, though, and this is what saves me. So now my king is not quite so trapped. He can give a couple of checks. He can check me out here to f1, but there's no mate. And then when he backs off, I can keep running because now I can drop a rook down to f1 to block the potential mate threat along the back rank there. But this involves giving up a pawn. He takes a pawn, I take a pawn. And I'm still 2 pawns up, but my king is in kind of an awkward position. I mean, technically white is better, but there are probably some pretty good drawing chances for black in this line. I can't say for sure it's a draw because the chess engine still gives white an advantage here, but could be pretty difficult. I am threatening to mate, by the way, so he does have to respect that as well. So, you know, it's a question of who's got the strongest counterplay here. But so still apparently an advantage to white in that position with the extra pawns, but no clear win. Whereas e6 is just clearly winning. So that was the way to play it. So anyway, d5. He didn't take advantage of my mistake, but just pushed on with his f-pawn, and now it's straightforward. Now I push on with e6. Played rook e2, getting his rook behind the pawn. I went ahead and grabbed over here. I'm just getting my rook out of the way to keep pushing these pawns forward. He played rook e1, attacking my pawn here, and I just defend it with the king. And then he resigned at this point because there's really nothing he can do, and those pawns are going to be coming forward. So interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.